Bruchim habayim and welcome. Boker Tov, a good morning to everyone for this week's Taste of Torah. We continue our advance through the Torah, and we are now on the third book, Leviticus in Greek and English, or Vayikra in Hebrew. The book carries the same name as the first portion because we use the first significant word of every portion to name it. So the book is Vayikra after the first word, and the portion is Vayikra after the first word. So we are now entering into the book of the priesthood and the significance of the cult. I'm going to use the word cult advisedly. I'm going to use it in its scientific meaning rather than the way we use it today. Today, we mean some kind of uber intense, self-segregating community that usually has some pejorative overtones to it. In anthropology and history, cult refers to the formal ritual practices of a given religion or culture. And certainly what was done in the Mishkan, the portable sanctuary, and then in the temple constitutes the Israelite cult. So now that we've dealt with that, let's talk about what's involved. It's involved in offerings, or the word I'm less enthusiastic for, sacrifice. Sacrifice comes from the Latin. Offering is probably a little better, I think, to capture all the nuances of why people offer materials to gods. It's a universal phenomenon. Everywhere from China to Great Britain in the ancient world, everyone offered sacrifices to their deities, made offerings to the gods. It's still incredibly common, whether you hang out with Hindus or Zoroastrians or Taoists or animists from Africa. The custom of making offerings to divinity is still very widespread, even though it's no longer prevalent in European-based religions or in Islam and things like that. So let's visit what we offer and why we offer it. Many people are very put off by the idea of the material offerings of the ancient Israelites. I think it's quite intriguing, and I try and approach it with a great deal of sympathy to try and understand it. It actually does have some lessons for us, and particularly, as always, I say that the way we did it brings a particular Jewish twist. So let's start. First, we're going to have our animal offerings, our rams and lambs, and our heifers and our bulls, which are the big grand offerings. Those are usually offered either by the community as what's called the tamid, a continuous offering, or they are offered by individuals for particular attempts to commune with God. And usually it is definitely scaled for expense. So it's a progressive tax, as it were. If you are not able to pay for your sacrifice in the form of a big animal, like a sheep or a cow, you would offer a couple of turtle doves or doves. Or if you were very poor, you just offer a bagel. There were other things, of course, offered, though the meat offerings are the most prominent. Olive oil would have been part of the offerings. Salt was often, as part of it, was made an offering. And there seems to be evidence, though it's rather more limited, that vegetables and produce would be sacrificed, raw produce. But those are the components. The question becomes, and what we're going to focus on today is why we did it. What are we trying to achieve? Well, the most obvious thing is that there's a kind of quid pro quo going on, right? We're offering the divinities, the gods, something in the hopes that they will do something for us, right? And in much of what we know about ancient religion, that is very much the case. So if we were to look at, say, Roman offerings, there's definitely an idea that you pledge something to the god in exchange for a promise that the god would intervene in some aspect of your life. Uh, in the ancient Near East, in particular, there's no one rule for why people make offerings. But in the ancient Near East, in particular, it seemed to be an idea of dependent, I lack a better term for it, dependent divinity, that the gods need to eat. And in the Mesopotamian creation epic, they lay it all out right there. So the gods have to work to feed themselves. And when the cosmos is created, one of the specific purposes of creating human beings is that they will serve as the serfs or the slaves of the gods, and that they will produce the food, offer it to the gods as offerings, and the gods get time off. Fantastic. All right. So it's right there in Enuma Elish, the creation myth that we have recovered in the last 120 years, that the gods expected us to feed them. And if we did so, they would maintain the cosmos. And if we didn't, they would disrupt the cosmos. So that was the critical deal. I suspect that if you go back to the earliest practices of our ancestors, to the pre Sinaitic way that our ancestors, our patriarchs and matriarchs, made offerings, and they did, there probably was something like that going on. We can see an example of that in Genesis 32, where Jacob is fleeing from his brother. He has a dream of a heavenly ladder or ramp that angels move up and down. He awakes and he says, I had no idea that God lived here. This must be the house of God. And then he erects a series of rocks, a matzeva, not quite an altar, but almost. And then he pours oil over it. And the oil is the offering. And then he basically makes a quid pro quo request. If you watch out for me, God, while I travel across this land, I will serve you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so there's probably how the earliest thinking was going on. By the time we get to Israelite religion, however, it's time for the Israelite twist. And so, in fact, the Torah does not demand that we feed God. And there's absolutely no evidence in the Hebrew Bible that God is dependent upon us providing foodstuffs. And in fact, that is directly refuted by a number of statements by the prophets. Do I need endless streams of sheeps and goats? No, right? You can burn whole forests and it wouldn't matter to me. So that's reflective of the first part of the Israelite twist, which is that God is independent. God is not needy of us in this regard. God does not need our support. All right. But then why do we do it? Well, first of all, we probably did because everyone else did it. People probably couldn't imagine religion without some kind of offering or sacrifice any more than we can imagine religion without convocations and prayers. It wouldn't make sense to us to not have those two things, and our ancestors probably would have found it incomprehensible to have some kind of service to God without a material cult of some sort. So it's a psychological thing on one level. But there really is a raison d'etre, a purpose to all of this. Look at, there are 5, arguably 6 different ways, types of offerings that the Israelites made. There is the Tamid offering, which was part of the regular cult. It meant it was done constantly on a regular basis. There was the Hagiga, which was special offerings for the holidays, which was done as a community. And then there were 3, oh no, I'm sorry. And the third one is that maybe it belongs in the Tamid, maybe it doesn't. That makes it questionable, is the Mincha, which is the afternoon offering, which is called the meal or flour offering. All right. For individuals, they have 3 types, okay? And the 3 types are the Shlema, or the well-being offering. It's basically a Thanksgiving offering. I'm doing well. I appreciate your presence in my life, God, and therefore I'm going to make this offering to show my appreciation. Then there is the sin offering, or the chet, and then there is also the asham, or the guilt offering. These are 2 kinds of offerings made over issues where you feel like you have fallen short of God's ideals, or you feel like you have done something to harm the community that needs to be resolved. And so you would offer a chet or a sham based on those issues. So again, there's a certain psychological aspect to it. Now realize that these are not get out of jail free cards, right? The fact of the matter is, in particular with the chet, the sin offering, it doesn't cover all sins. As a matter of fact, it only covers those sins that effectively are not crimes. If you've committed a crime, you have to be accountable to the society for it. You have to face whatever judgment from a court or some kind of mediation with your fellow man in order to resolve that. The only sins covered by a sin offering are either the things you did unintentionally and you only realize it after the fact, or sins that would have been considered offenses to God, but not something you could be brought to court for. All right. So any notion that these things provide a comprehensive escape clause from doing wrong is a mistake. That is not how the ancient cult worked. But the true Israelite, the true Jewish twist to the system is built into the actual word for an offering. And that's why I generally avoid the word sacrifice. It is more like an offering, and it's called the Corban. That is the correct term for these offerings. And Corban comes from the root word karuv, to draw close or to approach something, right? So what's going on here? It's not that we are feeding God, but it's more like another term from anthropology, a potlatch, which is that when you are wealthy, you bring gifts in order to hang out with other people. And we do that today, right? If you get invited to dinner, you dread the thought of showing up empty handed. You either cook a nice kugel, or you bring flowers, or you offer a bottle of wine. And it is assumed that whatever you bring will be shared with the host when you're there. And that's what's going on here. This is a kind of communion in which we come to the house of God. If you want to think about it, sort of the way we do our social life, you're coming to the house of God as a guest. You want to be received, so you bring a gift, you bring an offering, and then the offering is made. Now, some of them, the burnt offering that's part of the Tamid offerings, is completely consumed, but most of the time, what happens is that a part gets burned to God, a part is given as a payment to the priests who do the work, and a part of it is returned to you which you then eat. Usually they're in the sanctuary space or in its immediate surrounds. So in essence, we come to have a dinner party with God. That is the nature of drawing close to God. It's very Jewish, right? We're just all going to all gather around food and we're all going to hang out. And we can see that explicitly in the book in Exodus, where Exodus 25, where it literally says they ate and they drank and they saw the God of Israel. All right. So it's actually a form of communion, of being able to draw close to God. And that's the heart of the Israelite shift. It's not that God is needy of us for food or sustenance or supplies, and God gets cranky if we don't provide them. It is rather this notion that if God has a need, it's a need, it's an emotional need. It's the need to commune with his people. When we see in Exodus, God says, I am a jealous God, or God is passionate about his people. It's passionate with being with his people. That's why the Mishkan is built in the middle of the camp. It is meant for the people to go there on a regular basis and visit with God. And like good guests, they bring a gift offering, right? And that's at the heart of the whole idea. Now, it's interesting to compare it, say, to the Christian version of communion. I use the word communion completely conscious of the way it tends to be used in modern English, which is to refer to the Christian practice of the Eucharist. All right. Now, what the Christians have done is actually bypass the Jewish notion of communion. And what they've done is they've inverted, turned upside down, the pagan notion of encountering the God, right? Because in the pagan version, we feed the gods. In the Christian version, God feeds us, the wine and body of Christ. All right. So, interestingly enough, I tend to look at the idea of the Eucharist is not really an extension of the Jewish sacrificial system so much as one that is meant to appeal more to, originally at least, the pagan imagination. But so we also have communion, but the communion is of a different nature. And that's what our Torah portion is concentrating on. It's how do we draw close to God via the cult, via the official service to God. And of course, we still do it. The oneg, right? Instead of we drink and eat and see God, we see God in worship and then we eat and drink. And I would actually say this intense Jewish desire to have community encounters over food is in some ways simply an extension of what's going on in Vayikra. So understand this. The idea fundamentally built into Israelite religion is that even our strangest and most exalted cult is really about a mechanism for drawing close to divinity, to feeling intimate with God. I'm going to stop here. I obviously didn't quote a lot from the Torah portion. I did talk about the different kinds of offerings, but in any case, I hope that this helps you better understand and be sympathetic with how our Israelite ancestors approached their notion of religion as compared to how we have revised it in the last 2,000 years. So anyway, you have a great week, and we'll see you next week.